I'm starting now.
Yeah.
Okay, mic check. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening from wherever you're joining from. And thank you for joining the joint VNR capacity development webinar organized by Forus and Action for Sustainable Development. Leaving no one behind in the 2022 VNRs and learning lessons from effective VNR monitoring, CSO engagement and reporting cycle for the 2022. Let me welcome you once again and to say my name is Hlpf. I'll be the moderator for today. And I'm so excited that in the next couple of hours, we will be enjoying well-prepared presentations by a team of panelists that we have carefully selected today. However, before we start, I would hand over to Laura, who would advise us on the interpretation arrangements that we have for today. Laura, please.
Thank you, Hlpf. Welcome everybody to the webinar, Leaving No One Behind in the 2022 VNRs. This webinar will be interpreted simultaneously in English, French, and Spanish. So please select the language in which you want to listen to the webinar in the button interpretation below. And also please use the chat or the Q&A feature to share your questions and comments with the panel. Also, please note that this webinar is being recorded. Thank you. Bienvenue au webinaire Ne laissez personne derrière dans les ENV. Ce webinaire sera interprété simultanément en anglais, français et espagnol. Veuillez sélectionner la langue de laquelle vous souhaitez écouter cette session dans le bouton Interprétation ci-dessus. Veuillez aussi utiliser le chat et la fonction questions-réponses pour partager vos questions et commentaires avec les panels. Veuillez aussi noter que cette réunion sera enregistrée. Merci y bienvenidos y bienvenidas al seminario web No dejar a nadie atrás en los ENV. Esta reunión será interpretada simultáneamente en inglés, francés y español. Por favor, seleccione el idioma en que desea escuchar esta sesión en el botón de interpretación que aparece abajo. Y utilice el chat y la función de preguntas y respuestas para compartir sus preguntas y comentarios. Y también, por favor, tenga en cuenta que esta reunión será grabada. Muchas gracias. Thank you, Hlpf.
Yes, thank you so much, Laura, for setting us up. And I will then go quickly to Clara, who would help us with the poll that we have for this part of the conversations. Clara.
Hello. Hi, Hlpf. Hello, thank you. Hi, everyone. We have a short poll running. It's just to get a sense of who is in the room. Thank you, everyone, for introducing yourselves in the chat. But you also would like to know where you are from. We can see what type of experience you have with VNRs. So I'm now going to launch the poll, which will appear on your screens. The first question is, where are you based? So you can indicate your region. The second question is about whether you have been involved in a VNR before. And the third question is whether there is any information available for the 2022 VNR process in your country. So we're gonna try to answer this in about 1 minute, and then you will all see the results. We have 15 seconds remaining. Okay, so you may be able to now see the results on your screen. We have a majority of folks coming from North America, followed by people from Asia and then Africa and Europe. Half and half, more or less, have been involved in a VNR process before and have not. And most of you said that there is not information yet available for the 2022 VNR process. That's 60%, but 40% of you said there is information. So yeah, thanks for answering the poll. It's great to see a little bit what the type of experience that we have around and where people are coming from. And thank you so much. Now on to OUBC.
Yes, thank you so much for that Zoom poll, and that has shown us the diversity that we have on the call today. Recall that this joint VNR capacity development webinar is organized by Forus and Action for Sustainable Development. And we go straight into the opening panel on how to engage in the VNR process. And to set the scene for us would be Hlpf and Gwilyn Roberts Ari. Apologies if I do not get the pronunciations right. From the Intergovernmental Policy and Review Branch of UNDESA. Please, you would have our attention for 7 minutes. And this is how I'll moderate the 7 minutes. When you're 2 minutes to the end of your time, I will put on my video. And that should remind you that you're just 2 minutes to end. We have a lot of panelists that will be speaking today. So I would crave your indulgence to please respect the 7 minutes so that we can be able to enjoy ourselves. And to all of the 95 attendees that we have at the moment, we welcome you once again. And I hand over the floor to Hlpf and Gwilyn. Over to you.
Thank you, OUBC, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. I actually just put the stopwatch on, so I will make sure that we stick within the time. My name is Hlpf. I work in the division that deals with the servicing of the Hlpf and the VNR process in the Department of Economic and Social Affairs in the United Nations in New York. I'm here together with my colleague Gwilyn Roberts-Harry, who is the focal point for major groups participation in the Hlpf. And since he will be hopefully serving the Hlpf in 2022 again, it will be good if he speaks and he introduces you to some of the basics of the Hlpf. I always take good notes of polling before a webinar starts, and I've learned two important things here this morning. Around 50% of you have said that you have not been engaged in the VNR process before. And in the last question, I also noticed that around 50% of you think that there's not enough information available yet on the 2022 VNR process. My aim today with Gwilyn, and I think I can join the organizers, is to make sure that 50% goes up to 100% at the end of the next 2 hours. Of course, you will be engaged in the 2022 VNR process, which is basically just starting now. I will explain to you that in more detail. We basically just finalized the list of speakers, the list of countries presenting in 2022 last month in October. So we're early on in the cycle. So this is a very well-timed webinar, and we are sharpening our pencils to make sure that we are supporting the VNRs, the VNR presenting countries, and of course, a very important for us and also here today, the major groups, civil society that are participating in the process nationally, regionally, and globally. So if there's any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box if you want, if the organizers allow for that. Our email addresses are on the screen there, and you are more than welcome to contact us if you have a small or a big question. So with that, over to you, Gwilyn. He will share a few slides from his PowerPoint. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hlpf. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. As Hlpf introduced me, my name is Gwilyn Roberts-Harry. I'm a focal point for the major groups and other stakeholders at UNDESA. Thank you very much to Action for Sustainable Development and Forus for the invitation and for arranging this webinar so early in the VNR process. But just in order to signpost some of the slides that I'll be discussing today, I'll first give a brief overview of the Hlpf, the countries that will be presenting at the 2022 Hlpf, the timeline for the VNRs, the Voluntary National Reviews, and the modalities for the VNR session before sharing some resources. And of course, we're more than willing to share this PowerPoint presentation following the webinar. Next slide, please. As you may know, the Hlpf is the main UN platform on sustainable development. It plays a central role in the follow-up and review of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and for the Sustainable Development Goals at the global level. The Hlpf meets annually under the auspices of the Economic and Social Council, and in 2022 it'll meet from, the Hlpf will take place from Tuesday the 5th of July until Friday the 15th of July, with a ministerial segment taking place from the 13th to the 15th. It will focus on 5 SDGs, namely SDG 4 on quality education, SDG 5 on gender equality, SDG 14, life below water, SDG 15, life on land, and SDG 17, partnerships for the goals. There is a theme every year. This year's theme is building back better from the coronavirus disease while advancing the full implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The 2022 Hlpf program has not yet been published, but there's an image on this slide that demonstrates the VNR sessions highlighted in yellow from last year's program. And as you can see, they typically take place towards the latter end of the first week and in the second week. Next slide, please. There are 46 countries which will be presenting a voluntary national review at the 2022 Hlpf. I would encourage you to go to the Hlpf website and the VNR segment of the website, where these countries are listed. You can filter them by year, and each country has a profile. So you can find the main messages from the VNR countries. You can find the 2022 VNR reports when they will be published. You can find previous VNR reports on those pages too, and importantly, contact details for each VNR country focal point. Next slide, please. So just a brief timeline for the VNRs. This image has been taken from the UNDESA handbook for the preparation of the VNRs. There are 2 important deadlines, the first of which is the 3rd of May 2022, and this is when we hope to receive the submission of the main messages. These are 700-word short submissions. They form part of the official documentation and are therefore translated into the 6 official languages of the UN. And they provide a brief glimpse into what will be submitted as part of the VNR in full. And then at the 10th of June 2022, UN hopes to receive the VNRs in full. These aren't translated, but they are uploaded to the VNR platform that I previously mentioned in the languages in which they're received. And of course, they're meant to cover all of the SDGs, not those under not simply those under review. I appreciate I'm coming short on time, so I'll be brief with the next slide. Just very briefly, coming back to the VNR sessions as part of the Hlpf program, countries presenting their VNRs for the first time have 15 minutes to present, followed by 15 minutes for Q&A. Second, third and fourth time presenters have 10 minutes for the VNR presentation and then 10 minutes for the Q&A. And the usual tradition whereby the major groups and other stakeholders will be able to ask each country presenting a VNR a question will take place as well. And UNDESA will be working with the VNR task group of the major groups and other stakeholders in order to support that process. So just very briefly, there's one additional slide on resources. I'm sure this PowerPoint will be shared so you can go through those in your own time. I just wanted to say, sorry, next slide. And just to express once again, thank you very much for the invitation. We look forward to all of your participation in the 2022 Hlpf. I'll remain on the call on the webinar to answer questions or to answer via the chat box. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jup and William, for that very excellent presentation, and thank you for doing this in 7 minutes on the dot. And Elizabeth Schumann's conversations in the chat box that says, thank you to the organizers for arranging this helpful orientation, speaks so much about how good and how we've all benefited from your presentation. I'll now move to the next presenter. And this time around, we're talking about good practices linked to VNR process. And Ana de Oliveira will be doing this for us. Ana is a Research and Knowledge Management Officer at Corporation Canada. Ana, you have our attention for 7 minutes. At the dot of 5 minutes, you'll have my video on.
Thank you very much, Bessie, and good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everyone. So first of all, I would like to acknowledge that I speak to you from Ottawa, Canada, the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. We do this to pay respect to the hosts of this land and to remind ourselves of the history and contributions of Indigenous peoples everywhere in the world as an effort to leave no one behind. So with this, I'm going to talk to you about the Progressing National SDGs Implementation Report, which is an initiative carried out by a global coalition of 13 civil society organizations. The report is now in its 6th edition, which will be launched early next year. So next slide, please. So the Progressing Report, as we call it, focuses mainly on the analysis of VNR reports, but we also include the analysis of VNR-related CSO reports, namely shadow or spotlight reports, and Nicholas will be talking more about them in a minute. So for 2021, we are focusing on 42 VNR reports and 17 CSO reports. Next slide, please. So in our review, we focus on many different aspects. And here you can see the 4 main chapters of the report, which are built based on 10 pillars of analysis. And throughout the report, we also include highlights of best practices, and we list recommendations for the countries presenting VNRs. So now I'm going to showcase some of the good practices that have so far arisen from this year analysis. So next one, please. Yes, thank you. So this comes from the analysis of the VNR report from Norway, which shows very clearly evidence of how changes are being made at the policy level. And they do this for each one of the goals, which shows how the 2030 agenda has been incorporated into national frameworks and policies. Next one, please. So this shows coordination. So there were 6 small island development states, or SIDS as we call them, reporting in 2021. So all of them coordinated to include a common section in their VNR reports, where they highlight common vulnerabilities, challenges, and also opportunities. And this is a commitment to improve cooperation efforts at the SIDS level, and this also contributes towards sustainable development initiatives. Next one, please. So, and here we have a good practice from Madagascar. So related to a program to accelerate entrepreneurship among young people. And Madagascar has done this through SDGs integration. And so 3 SDGs are highlighted in this program. So health, gender equality, and youth entrepreneurship. So this integration of SDGs in policy development leverages synergies to foster implementation. So this is an interesting example of policy coherence and integration. Next one, please. This practice from Cuba related to the topic of leaving no one behind. So the Yo Si Puedo program, so meaning yes, I can. This is for literacy promotion and education of people of all ages. So far, according to Cuba's VNR report, millions of people in Latin America and African countries have received literacy training under this program. Next one, please. This is also in regarding leaving no one behind, but more specifically to recognize the disproportionate effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. And this comes from the VNR report of Malaysia. And so Malaysia recognizes that challenges are more pronounced for certain groups as opposed to others. And they list those groups. And this is a good practice in the sense that by recognizing the specific issues that each one of those groups face helps in the development of specific solutions to leave no one behind during the COVID-19 crisis. Next one, please. And this is my final one. So this is a practice not coming from a VNR report, but coming from a CSO report that highlights initiatives from civil society in Cabo Verde. So there are some specific projects, one, for example, to foster microfinance and youth empowerment and environmental conservation, both inland and of marine life, and also the development of an autonomous SDG monitoring process to review selected SDGs and issue policy recommendations. So next one is my final one. So thank you very much. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you. Back to you, Hlpf.
Yes, and thank you so much, Hannah de Oliveira, for that very beautiful presentation, and also for doing that in less than 7 minutes. You saved some seconds for me. The next presentation will now be us looking at models for civil society reporting, spotlight reports, and the people's scorecard. And to do that for us will be Nicolas Sotoju. Nicolas is the Policy and Advocacy Officer at A4AST. Nicolas, you have our attention for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Hlpf. Yes, so I will quickly present you the People's Scorecard process in terms of its methodology, as well as some of the findings from this year's scorecard and spotlight reports. Next slide, please, Laura. Yes, so the People's Scorecard tool, to give you some context, was developed in a collaborative manner in 2018 within the A4AST network, and it was conceived as a way to foster independent reporting based on the aggregation of shared perceptions on different aspects of the quality of the implementation process in order to allow comparison and identification of patterns and trends. So this year specifically, we partner with 31 national CSO coalitions in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and Middle East regions. And we also benefit for the contribution from 3 European countries. So in terms of the methodology that we use for this perception-based tool, I have to say that it's based on a qualitative assessment of each SDG that is centered around 10 key areas that together constitute an inclusive conception of the implementation process. And although there isn't a set sequence for the score-based assessment, we do encourage our national partners to distribute or conduct in-person surveys or virtual surveys to a wide range of CSOs distributed broadly across their countries, and also community groups, and then process the data and aggregate a draft scorecard, which will be the base for a workshop in order to validate the results. Then these results provide the structure for the analysis conducted in the spotlight report, and they can also complement the report, since some national coalitions do have developed over time their specific methodologies for their spotlight reporting processes. Now, regarding the next slide, please. Laura, yes. Now, regarding the basis for the assessment, we have these 10 key areas, which can be grouped into 3 broader categories. which are policy environment, which deals with the overarching policy documents or more specific sectorial public policies. Institutional capacity, which try to measure the type of institutional support, the level of implementation at the national and local level, and also the framework for monitoring, evaluation, and reporting, the official one. And then the inclusiveness category, which tries to measure how the public debate is organized around the SDG implementation process. Next slide, please, Laura. So this is a list quickly of the 31 national partners we've been working with this year. As you can see, is a pretty broad range of VNR countries in each region, but also we have some follow-up countries that presented VNRs in 2020. And we asked them to follow up on their countries' commitments this year. Next slide, please, Laura. Thank you. So this first graph shows some aggregated results from this year People Scorecard exercise, where you can see that the average scores for each SDG, with all of them standing in and around 50%, as you can see, and which amounts to an average of 51.64%. What we could simply, a little bit simplistically call the people-centered SDGs score a bit higher, as you can see, 1 to 5, whilst the SDG on oceans and one of the SDGs that has the most interlinkages, which is SDG 12, are the lowest scoring ones with 45 and 46% respectively. Now, the main factor that explains these mid-range scores across the board has to do with the fact that although there is a fair amount of policy frameworks available in each country, almost all of the spotlight reports note there are significant implementation gaps on the ground. And also the perception is influenced by other factors like the low level of participation that are reported by CSOs, and also the lack of transparency that seems to be a pretty cross-cutting element. And sure enough, next slide, please. And sure enough, this is reflected in the following graph, which aggregates the results for each key area, where we can see that the policy framework area is the highest scoring area with 61%, whilst transparency and local implementation are the lowest scoring areas. And it has to be noted that all the key areas related to inclusiveness score below 50%, namely civil society engagement, public awareness, and transparency. Next slide, please, Laura. So in this graph, we show some country-based comparative scores for Indonesia, Norway, Mexico, and Zimbabwe. Here we can see that Mexico has the lowest score with 39%, and it does score low on all the key areas and all the 3 categories, namely policy environment, institutional support, and institutional capacity, and inclusiveness. In the case of Indonesia and Zimbabwe, it's mid-range countries with 54 and 50% respectively. The difference between them is that Indonesia scores mid-range in all categories, whilst Zimbabwe scores medium range in policy framework, but low on institutional capacity and inclusiveness. Whilst Norway, as you can see, is the highest scoring country with 75%, and does well across the board, although a little bit lower on the environment-related SDGs. Next slide, please. In terms of key takeaways that we could draw from these results is that even though the SDGs were conceived as a roadmap to foster sustainable development and transforming development models by bringing together a wide range of societal actors in order to build consensus around transformational and integrated policy preferences, the aggregated perception reflected by the scorecard results and the spotlight reports is one of piecemeal, fragmented procedural gains, mainly in terms of sectorial policy frameworks and isolated institutional arrangements. So 6 years into the process, it hasn't really brought the SDGs hasn't really brought about substantial changes. And when I say substantial, I mean in terms of meaningful dialogue for policy formulation, on inclusion of marginalized communities in policy-making processes, in horizontal partnerships, in integration, in policy coherence, in transparency, etc. That said, the continuous engagement from civil society coalitions, especially by contributing to the VNR process, has proven valuable and may be the only real avenue for building more legitimate and substantial transformation processes. And the development specifically of scorecard and spotlight reports do allow civil society coalitions to assess the quality of the implementation process and build a more cohesive and compelling narrative around what are the challenges, the gaps and successes of the process up to now. So the VNR process does provide some entry points for policy engagement and articulate improvements to the wider implementation process. So we would really encourage you, and especially those of you who are in countries that are presenting VNRs next year, to really find out about your official VNR process and also organize within civil society as widely and exclusively as possible and as early as possible in order to conduct consultations and provide a spotlight report. Because of course, the substance of the reports is very important, is essential, but also the sequencing and the timing of the process is also key. So it's really important to be right off the bat, ready to tackle this. But I think Ollie and Deirdre will provide more information about the next year process a little bit later. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much, Nicholas, for taking us through that process. And I see the chat room is buzzing already with very good thoughts and also some questions. Please note that at the end of the first two panels, we will have a 10 to 15 minute session for Q&A. And just in case you have questions to ask, please put them in the Q&A box and we'll pick it up from there. And we do also have another session where we can then also have you raise up your hand and talk. That will be at the last panel session that we have today. Let's talk about engaging with the VNRs in 2022 and looking at the Forus survey findings, and Laura Manzi will be taking us through that. Laura Manzi is Advocacy Assistant at Forus. Laura, you have our attention for 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, Bessie. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm just gonna quickly share with you some of the findings of Forus surveys called the VNRs 22 Forus survey. We shared these surveys about a month ago with all the Forus national platforms in countries where governments will present their voluntary national reviews at the next high-level political forum. And the goal of this survey was to basically understand what are their expected level of engagement with this process, and also what kind of supports they expect and they need from Forus. I think it was mentioned before today what countries are presenting their VNRs next year, but I thought this map was useful to have a global vision. As you can see, most countries next year will be presenting from Africa, with 22 countries being the continent with more countries engaged, followed by Europe, Latin America, and then the Asia Pacific. But regarding Forus members that will directly be involved in this process, here you can take a look at all the platforms that will be actively engaging with the VNR process. And these are the 12 platforms that take part in the survey, and that we contact them to have this kind of information. As you can see, most of them are indeed from Africa. So going to the survey results straight, the first part was mostly focused on the contact with government, because we wanted to know what kind of information and what kind of contacts they had. So the first question was, has your government already begun the preparation of its VNRs? And as you can see from the graph below, the vast majority of them was not aware of that. So we found out that there was a clear lack of information in this regard. And as you can see, only 55% of them have actual names and contact details of the person in the government who was responsible for the VNR process, and only 20% of them have been in contact. So we thought there was useful information for us to understand that there is still incomplete contact with government, which is a key thing, which is a key aspect of the VNR process. And also, most respondents are still not aware of a national timetable for public consultation. So it was also an interesting data. We also asked them about what were the advocacy and policy priority for next Hlpf. And we gave them as multiple choice all the SDGs. And the SDGs that was selected by most people were SDG 1 on no poverty and SDG 16 on peace and justice. Which are clearly the main points our members want to address during the next Hlpf. And also there were other SDGs that emerged as relevant, like SDG 17 or SDG 13 on climate action. And we are particularly interested in SDG 16 and 17, which are two goals that Forus is particularly advocating on. So it was interesting for us to know. The other question was on CSO shadow spotlight reports. It was good to see that those platforms who had previously been involved in producing this kind of reports said that they consider it had an impact on the VNR process. And also the vast majority of them requested more training on how to produce this tool, which is being seen as a relevant tool for civil society. We also had a section of the survey on Hlpf when questioning about what kind of study events topics they were hoping to see next year. The vast majority of them said the enabling environment and civic space is the most pressing issues. But there was also interest on multi-stakeholder partnership, financing for development, and also climate. So these are the main themes that emerge. And we also asked them about what kind of webinar, what kind of supports they needed to prepare for these important events. And again, the majority of them mentioned training on produce CSO shadow reports, but there was also good interest in webinars on understanding the VNR process and best practices, which is what we're doing today, and also about preparing for the UN Hlpf 2022. And the very last section of the survey was on UN Regional Sustainable Forum. So we were very surprised because not all of them said that they will participate. And instead, they all said they will participate to the Hlpf. So there was a gap in this. And we thought there should be more awareness of the importance on this kind of a forum, because CSO can network, can also organize study events. And we thought it was relevant to stress also the importance of attending this sorts of events. And indeed, only 11% said that they had the contact of the regional commission of the UN. So there was, again, a lack of information. So just some conclusions to finalize. I hope I'm still respecting my time. So there is still not enough contact with governments, and there is a lack of information in that. There is, however, a willingness on the part of civil society to produce and also be trained to produce each other reports, which are considered to have an impact on the VNR process in a certain way. And also the topic of enabling environment and civic space emerged as the most pressing one for civil society. And also there is not enough engagement with the UN Regional Sustainable Forum. But that was all. And if you have any contact, you got my email there. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Hlpf.
Yes, thank you so much, Laura, and to the 134 participants that we have at this time. Let me thank you for still staying on the call, and to mention that we'll now go into the second panel. And for this second panel, we will be sharing lessons learned on effective stakeholder dialogues and developing independent reports. And to start us off will be Denisa Amelia Kwayuran, who is the program assistant of SDGs at Hlpf. Denisa, you have our attention for 7 minutes, and at the dot of 5 minutes into your presentation, I'll put on my video.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. So today I'm going to present in the case of Indonesia. My name is Denisa Amelia Kaurian as the Program Assistant for Sustainable Development Goals. Next, please. Okay, so I'm coming from International NGO Forum on Indonesian Development. So we have been established since 1985, and we currently have 3 main issues, which are reducing inequality, implementation of sustainable development goals, and also human rights and democracy. Next, please. So just to give a context, Indonesia has delivered the 3rd time of VNR in 2021. So we are very active in delivering voluntary national reviews, and also just for the context as well, Indonesia has regulations on presidential regulations for sustainable development goals, and INVIT has created Indonesia People Scorecard for SDGs in 2019 and 2021. However, in 2019 we are not really inclusive, and in 2021 we got support from Action for Sustainable Development as well as regional process facilitated by Anselmo. So the process is more participative and also inclusive. There are several steps in order for us to create a report. The first one is data collection. So we created online survey using Google Forms involving 90 respondents. 30% of them are national civil society organizations, and about 60% of respondents are directors or decision makers in their respective agencies. So in order to confirm the finding, we created focus group discussions involving 17 experts from national and local civil society organizations, those who are working on the issue of disability, young people, migrants, sustainable development goals, localizations, women, and other vulnerable groups. We also confirmed the finding again through expert review, inviting 4 experts. One of them are very expert in human right perspective to ensure that the report has human right perspective as well. So we also launched the report on 29 September 2021. So we invite at that time Ministry of National Development Planning, which is the focal point of SDGs implementation in Indonesia, as well as academics and also civil society organization. Several learning points for us in order to create the reports, and unfortunately many civil society organizations have difficulty filling out questionnaires because it's Google form questionnaires due to knowledge and experience gaps, along with gaps in access to information technology. Because in Indonesia we have problems in inequality on infrastructures. Unfortunately, many local civil society organizations are not able to actively participate in our polling in Google Forms. The second one, the number of each goal field was unequal because we want to ensure that the respondents are able to fill based on the issue that they are working on. Therefore, the number of each goal field was unequal. The third one, the report provides a macro picture of SDGs. This one is very appreciative by the Ministry of National Development Planning. However, we also received several recommendations. It would be better to add micro analysis according to priority and critical view to get a more detailed understanding of the implementation of SDGs in the countries. Ministry of National Development Planning as a focal point appreciate the report as it provides a neutral and critical narrative to improve the implementation of SDGs. Next, please. So we would like to also give a little bit information about the finding of our report. In the context of national implementations, we received the highest score in the context of legal and policy frameworks, unfortunately very low in the transparency and accountability mechanisms. So just for information, Indonesia ranked 97 out of 165 in SDSN Index 2021. So it's actually one of the lowest. Okay, sorry. It's actually one of the lowest in Asia Southeast Asia. In the context of national implementations, about 70% of Indonesia assess the SDGs achievement in Indonesia as mediocre. So it's not okay, it's not bad as well. So in the context of monitoring and evaluations, this is actually one very important point. About 80% of respondents were not involved in the VNR formulation. So this is one of the key points that we would like to inform to the government. Next, please. Oh yeah, sorry. In the context of dialogue with government, several good practices. In fact, had bilateral meeting with the Secretariat of SDGs. We want to ensure the VNR preparations have human right-based approach, and also VNR formulation is participatory and inclusive. The report should provide a balanced overview between progress and the challenges in reaching the SDGs. In the context of challenges, unfortunately, the government of Indonesia collecting best practices coming from local civil society organizations, but the good practices from the government and large institutions such as the UN are featured more than good practices from local civil society organizations. I think it's because of this, maybe several considerations regarding the scale of the project and also sustainability. But unfortunately, not many good initiatives coming from local CSO are able to feature in Voluntary National Review 2021. There is also unequal access to technology and internet. In the context of data, in the context of data, fortunately, because INVIT itself is evidence-based advocacy NGO, several of our data are able to feature in VNR 2021. For example, data in regard to COVID-19 agenda, in regard to health protocol, and also social assistance match and distributions are able to feature in VNR 2021. And also we also highlighted there are so many civil society organizations in Indonesia are negatively affected during COVID-19 pandemic. So it's also featured because the study concluded that its high dependency on donor funding caused barrier experienced by CSO during the pandemic. And also in the context of how we actively participate in disseminating information to INVIT members and other CSO members about the submission of good practices. And the context of potential engagement, currently Indonesia is undergoing a process of the revision of presidential regulation on SDGs, because there is some problems in the context of mandate of the implementation of SDGs in the local level. And the second one, we are currently promoting the establishment of SDG support facilities, because as we know, there are many civil society organizations are not able or face constraint to implement sustainable development goals in the local regions. The third one, we're also addressing SDGs in Indonesia G20 presidency. Next, please. So this is actually the last slide in regard to Indonesia commitment on SDGs in G20. So Indonesia will host the presidency of G20 in the next year, in 2022. And President Joko Widodo mentions that the case of sustainable development goals, the G20 countries must make a number of joint efforts to ensure that the SDGs can achieve according to targets set in 9 years. So there is actually a concrete commitment coming from the government, but we as a civil society, we also need to ensure and overview the implementation of SDGs in the national and local context, as well as in the presidency of G20 countries. So that's all from me. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much, Denisa, for giving us the Indonesian experience. And we'll now take a flight to Madagascar. And now at Madagascar, we would be received by Elisa Marie Alberti Razavina Review. I hope I get that right. Who will also share with us the Madagascar experience. You have our attention for 7 minutes.
Bonjour à tous. Merci de m'avoir donné la parole. Pour le cas de Madagascar, j'aimerais... vous m'entendez? Vous m'entendez? Pour le cas de Madagascar, j'aimerais vous partager qu'en 2018, avec l'implication de la société civile, donc Madagascar a fixé sa priorisation pour une meilleure appropriation nationale des ODD en adoptant 64 cibles et 85 indicateurs. Par rapport aux expériences de la société civile sur le suivi des ODD, j'aimerais parler en premier lieu notre expérience, c'est-à-dire de la plateforme nationale des organisations de la société civile, par l'élaboration d'un rapport indépendant de suivi des ODD. c'est une première expérience. Et d'après les OSC, donc, la performance du pays en termes de réalisation des objectifs de développement durable est en général très modeste. Les OSC ont été sollicités dans tout le processus et ont joué, dans la mesure du possible, leur rôle, à citer par exemple lors de la priorisation des ODD, comme j'avais dit tout à l'heure, et la préparation du forum politique de haut niveau. J'aimerais quand même souligner que la participation des OSC à ce processus est parfois mitigée par des questions d'ordre politique. L'aspiration des OSC peut-être classée par groupement thématique, concerne donc la lutte contre la pauvreté, l'espace de dialogue pour exprimer librement, le mécanisme de transparence dans la gestion des affaires publiques, la lutte contre la corruption, la promotion de la bonne gouvernance et la gestion des ressources naturelles et une meilleure infrastructure pour le désenclavement. Donc, à vrai dire, l'ODD 16 est fortement touché par la revendication des OSC. En ce qui concerne l'examen national, là j'ai parlé du rapport indépendant de la société civile, et maintenant je vais aborder l'examen national volontaire de Madagascar. Madagascar a déjà fait 2 rapports volontaires en 2016 et 2021. Notre constat, nous, la société civile, c'est l'implication inclusive de tous les acteurs dans la société civile, dans ce processus, n'est pas du tout satisfaisant. En analysant les 2 rapports, nous constatons que dans l'ensemble, le progrès n'est pas toujours palpable. Bien sûr, on parle de progrès par rapport à l'environnement, mais nous, du côté de la société civile, nous constatons que certains ODD censés être accélérateurs ou piliers pour atteindre les autres ODD, à l'exemple de l'ODD 16, demeurent dans sa mise en œuvre un principal obstacle. On constate donc que le dysfonctionnement institutionnel et la corruption qui sont frappants et l'aspect gouvernance occulté. Heureusement qu'il y a une initiative, je dirais, très louable, donc, qui vient du PNUD de Madagascar pour appuyer les OSC par la mise en place d'un cadre intégré des ODD à Madagascar. Donc, cette cadre intégré des OSC pour la mise en œuvre et le suivi des ODD a pris naissance donc au mois de septembre dernier. Nous pensons que c'est une nouvelle approche plus inclusive d'impliquer l'ensemble de la société civile de Madagascar. Mais il y a encore beaucoup de défis sur la question de la réduction des inégalités à l'horizon de 2030. Nous pensons que des actions spécifiques sont aussi à déployer pour réduire les inégalités dans l'interpellation pour la révision et l'élaboration des stratégies politiques de protection et promotion des droits, l'influence pour l'orientation des appuis financiers et autres vers les personnes discriminées, l'influence pour la collecte des données statistiques par secteur et en lien avec les ODD. C'est un grand problème à Madagascar parce que il n'existe pas de base de données en temps réel, et de même, la loi sur l'accès à l'information n'est pas encore adoptée jusqu'ici, alors que ça fait partie des outils de suivi des ODD. Merci à tous. Merci, j'ai fini.
Yes, thank you very much for that experience from Mexico. And we'll now move for that experience from Madagascar. And we will now move to Mexico, where Laura Becerra, Director and Coordinator of the CSO Monitoring Platform on the SDGs in Mexico, will be talking to us. Please note that when you're speaking, because of the interpretation, we would like this to go slowly. I know you are also pressured with time, and I'm keeping the time also for 7 minutes, but please just ensure that we can let the interpreters also hear you and be able to do this well. So I'll give it back to Laura, and you have 7 minutes.
Gracias, buenos días acá desde México. Sí, agradezco mucho que se considere esta experiencia de seguimiento a la Agenda 2030. He preparado una presentación para tratar de cubrir el tiempo que se me ha otorgado en este seminario, en donde destacamos la participación de esta plataforma o espacio de organizaciones de sociedad civil que damos seguimiento a la Agenda 2030 desde el momento en que estaba debatiéndose en Naciones Unidas. Igual pondremos algunos puntos de consecuencias, de conclusiones respecto a nuestra interlocución con el gobierno nacional o gobierno federal. La primera, por favor. Bueno, nosotros como espacio de organizaciones de la sociedad civil, este año hicimos un informe alternativo que llamamos Informe Luz, y de esta experiencia es de la que vamos a platicar con ustedes, con el objeto de que las lecciones aprendidas sean útiles para quienes el año que entra intentarán un ejercicio similar. Por favor, la que sigue. No me detengo mucho en ello. Este es el contenido final del informe Luz que integramos esta plataforma de organizaciones, y como ustedes pueden apreciar, bueno, no pueden porque no pueden leer en español, pero es un contenido más referido a la estrategia, a las políticas de gobierno, al balance que hacemos las organizaciones. No es un informe Luz que aterrice en los ODS, aunque nosotros sí hicimos una calificación de los Objetivos de Desarrollo del Milenio, pero este informe es un informe cualitativo, en donde pusimos énfasis en las estrategias nacionales y la participación de otros actores no gubernamentales, con recomendaciones muy particulares para el gobierno. La que sigue, por favor. Entonces, es importante destacar que México presentó este año su tercer y último informe voluntario en el Foro Político de Alto Nivel, y entonces desde el grupo focal de organizaciones o plataforma que estamos interesadas en la Agenda 2030 desde el 2015 que estamos articuladas, diseñamos una metodología con un cuestionario, como dije, de corte cualitativo para valorar el cumplimiento de la agenda desde el gobierno, sobre todo de los enfoques, la transversalidad, la universalidad de derechos y la equidad de género, que sentimos están ausentes en la estrategia nacional de gobierno. Es una estrategia quizás que no asume estos enfoques en la implementación de la agenda. Y como dije, este informe Luz destacó recomendaciones y desafíos para el gobierno, y como voy a contar ya fueron presentados. La que sigue, por favor. Entonces, hay que decir también que el gobierno actual de nuestro país tomó posesión en diciembre de 2018. Por lo tanto, nuestro informe alternativo, nuestro informe Luz, parte justamente de que la Agenda 2030 se aprobó con otro gobierno de otro partido político, y ese otro gobierno en el 2015 era un gobierno cuestionado, digamos, con problemas de democracia y desprestigiado en términos de, digamos, de respeto a los derechos humanos, de manera que fue complicado hacer este balance porque el nuevo gobierno arrancó en el 2019 digamos, su implementación de la Agenda 2030. La que sigue, por favor. Este espacio de organizaciones de la sociedad civil, que como ya dije, empezó a articularse desde el 2015, en este informe lo que planteamos fue hacer un análisis de los resultados, de los obstáculos y retos que tiene la actual administración o el actual gobierno, y hicimos una serie de preguntas referidas a esos aspectos, digamos, estratégicos de la implementación de la agenda. 20 organizaciones hicimos parte de este informe Luz. Parecen pocas, sin embargo, son organizaciones que son redes, capítulos nacionales de instancias internacionales, organizaciones que tenemos muchos años trabajando particularmente en torno a la política exterior, a la política interior, al desarrollo. Por lo tanto, somos organizaciones que conocemos, digamos, el asunto del desarrollo sostenible. La que sigue, por favor. Nos hacen algunas preguntas para esta participación y entonces el desarrollo de este informe a través de una consulta, si nos permitió aprovechar alguna oportunidad. Nosotros decimos que este ejercicio que hicimos en efecto nos permitió, digamos, abrir, digamos, las posibilidades de interlocución con el gobierno, y fuimos parte de un ejercicio paralelo al informe Luz que el propio gobierno federal abrió y formó un comité con 9 distintos actores y sectores de la sociedad, uno de ellos las organizaciones de la sociedad civil, y nuestra organización Equipo Pueblo, junto con otra organización de Hunter Project, fuimos parte de este comité y tuvimos entonces la posibilidad de diseñar una consulta a otras 80 organizaciones de la sociedad civil, y esa consulta fue sistematizada por nosotros y fue integrada en el informe, digamos, oficial, en el informe nacional voluntario. Esta es una buena práctica que queremos compartir con ustedes, porque entonces realizamos 2 ejercicios, uno de ellos que implicó que nuestra consulta a las organizaciones de la sociedad civil estuviera incorporada en un informe que hace su balance del cumplimiento de la agenda desde la perspectiva del gobierno, pero también del sector privado, de la sociedad civil, de la academia, de los legisladores y de otros actores. La que sigue, por favor. Nuestro proceso entonces interno, como espacio de organizaciones o grupo focal que hicimos este informe, hacemos como resumen: hicimos investigación, diseñamos metodología, hicimos esta consulta virtual a las organizaciones de sociedad civil, sistematizamos, digamos, la información y logramos consensar y validar con las organizaciones participantes las conclusiones y recomendaciones. Digamos, esta es la práctica o la buena práctica que también queremos compartir con ustedes. Validar con todas las organizaciones los resultados y las conclusiones no fue fácil. Tuvimos que sentarnos a platicar y a matizar y ajustar lo que se estaba diciendo, porque no todas pensábamos de la misma manera. La que sigue, por favor. Respecto al diálogo con gobierno, como ya se los dije, hicimos este informe Luz que presentamos públicamente tanto al gobierno como a las organizaciones de sociedad civil en un evento público. Participamos en los eventos oficiales, fuimos parte de la delegación oficial que acude al foro político de alto nivel, y realizamos otros eventos junto con el gobierno virtuales para presentar el conjunto del informe nacional voluntario, y fuimos parte de estos comités y somos parte de otros comités de seguimiento y evaluación que tiene México, y particularmente del mecanismo que se abrió también en la CEPAL desde el primer foro regional. A propósito de lo que alguien decía hace rato, sí es muy relevante lo que nosotros hemos logrado hacer desde este mecanismo de participación ante la CEPAL como organizaciones de la sociedad civil. La que sigue, por favor. Desafíos.
Laura, can I suggest that you please start rounding up?
Voy al último desafío, por favor. Sí, no, solo quiero hablar de que colocamos retos que tenemos. Si pasa la siguiente, si me das medio segundo. La que sigue, por favor. Sí nos importa mucho decir que tenemos dificultad con la transparencia, con los mecanismos de rendición de cuentas, los mecanismos de participación de la sociedad civil, aunque están formalizados, no están operando de manera efectiva. Por lo tanto, a pesar de esto que conseguimos, tenemos todavía serias dificultades y retos para una participación cualitativa como organizaciones de la sociedad civil, y estamos esperando mantener el diálogo con el Poder Ejecutivo para que seamos consideradas como actoras del desarrollo. Perdón y gracias.
Yes, thank you so much, Laura, for that experience from Mexico. And we'll now go to Spain to hear their experience. Then after the presentation from Spain, we would open up the conversation via the Q&A chat box, and also ask colleagues to raise up their hands so that we can speak to this for like 10 minutes. Maria Gonzalez, member of the Technical Secretariat for Futuro and Common, will give us the Spanish experience. Over to you for 7 minutes.
Hola, buenas tardes a todos y a todas. ¿Se me escucha bien? Bueno. Muchas gracias por esta oportunidad de participar en el espacio tan interesante que han organizado los compañeros de Action for Sustainable Development y Forus. Muy brevemente, una pincelada sobre qué es Futuro en Común para la próxima, por favor. La próxima, gracias. Una pincelada sobre qué es Futuro en Común. Somos una gran alianza de sociedad civil trabajando en desarrollo sostenible aquí en España, la más representativa, digamos, de todo el Estado español, con organizaciones miembro de muchos sectores diferentes, de organizaciones medioambientales, de organizaciones que trabajan temas de infancia, de cooperación internacional y justicia global, de acción social, grandes sindicatos, los más representativos del Estado español, 2 de los 3 más representativos están también en Futuro en Común, organizaciones de paz, feminismos, no sé si lo he dicho, en fin, con una amplia representación intersectorial, y además somos una alianza que aglutina, como es el caso de lo que ha trasladado la compañera Laura de México, que organizamos también, o sea, que aglutinamos a organizaciones y plataformas también, con lo cual es verdad que tenemos 50 miembros, que puede parecer poca representatividad, pero muchas de estos miembros son a su vez plataformas sectoriales que aglutinan a muchas otras organizaciones, ¿no? En la siguiente diapositiva simplemente el listado para que podáis valorar la representatividad de Futuro en Común, todas las organizaciones, las plataformas sectoriales y luego también las organizaciones que están a título individual. Básicamente, siguiente por favor. Gracias. Básicamente nuestro objetivo de trabajo es promover el desarrollo sostenible a través de un cambio estructural y sistémico de modelo para de verdad poner a las personas y el planeta en el centro. Para ello tenemos como principal herramienta la Agenda 2030. Creemos que a pesar de sus luces y sus sombras, contradicciones internas y limitaciones, sigue siendo una buena agenda para promover transformaciones y el impacto que necesitamos. Y nuestro valor añadido está precisamente en la intersectorialidad. Pretendemos ser, cosa que no es fácil, más que la suma de las partes. No queremos aglutinar las demandas o los análisis que hacen las organizaciones y plataformas sectoriales que son miembros de Futuro en Común, sino que intentamos elevar una narrativa y una serie de propuestas más allá de la suma de lo sectorial para identificar las grandes palancas para el cambio y para arrastrar la consecución de la Agenda 2030 en su conjunto, desde esa visión precisamente intersectorial y multidimensional. Por favor, la siguiente. Ya para centrarnos en lo que ha sido el examen nacional voluntario de este año, una breve pincelada de contexto. Lo que nuestro gobierno presentaba, el insumo principal que llevaba al examen nacional voluntario el gobierno de España, era la estrategia de desarrollo sostenible. 6 años después de la aprobación de la Agenda 2030, en España todavía no contábamos con un plan nacional, ¿no? Futuro en Común, además de hacer un diagnóstico multidimensional y propuestas de transformación transformación de políticas públicas en torno a esos grandes ejes de cambio, hemos venido demandando desde el principio de nuestra conformación que se asentaran los cimientos sobre los que poder construir e implementar la Agenda 2030. Veníamos demandando un sistema de gobernanza multinivel y multiactor que recién se aprobó unos meses antes de que empezara este proceso de elaboración de la Estrategia de Desarrollo Sostenible y que todavía cuenta con muchas carencias en cuanto a recursos técnicos y humanos. Además, pedíamos que este sistema de gobernanza multinivel y multiactor estuviera liderado desde el más alto nivel del gobierno, cosa que hoy por hoy no hemos conseguido. Pedíamos un sistema de revisión y seguimiento que incluyese buenas metodologías para la medición del progreso, así como un panel de mando a la altura, con indicadores que estuvieran a la altura de los retos y las innovaciones que nos propone la Agenda de 2030, cosa que todavía no hemos conseguido de forma completa, ¿no? Y por supuesto, pedíamos un sistema integral para la coherencia de políticas, para el desarrollo sostenible integrado en las estructuras de gobernanza de Agenda 2030, que está en proceso y que hemos conseguido incorporar a esta estrategia nacional. Y por último, pedíamos la estrategia nacional en sí misma, ¿no? Por ello, para nosotros desde hace muchos años esto era un hito importantísimo y hemos puesto muchísima energía en el proceso, además de muchas expectativas, porque para nosotras la estrategia de desarrollo sostenible debía ser el gran proyecto de país en el que se plasmaran un horizonte de cambio, de transformaciones de aquí a 2030 basado en un consenso y en una voluntad de transformación compartida, ¿no? Por eso habíamos puesto muchas expectativas y hemos trabajado durísimo durante este proceso que luego ha sido muy corto en el tiempo, ¿no? Ya que un proceso tan ambicioso seguramente hubiera requerido de horizontes temporales más amplios y con seguridad de metodologías y recursos humanos más a la altura del desafío que enfrentábamos, ¿no? Como Futuro en Común hemos estado muy implicadas tanto en la parte oficial a través del proceso que os explicaré a continuación, pero también en todo nuestro trabajo de construcción de narrativa conjunta hemos ido siguiendo todas las fases del proceso oficial y elaborando documentos de reacción a cada una de las fases, ¿no? Y con todo como resultado del proceso, por supuesto, hemos hecho no tanto un informe sombra, pero sí un documento de posicionamiento para este examen nacional voluntario que incluía una parte de reacción al documento oficial de Estrategia de Desarrollo Sostenible y además una serie de recomendaciones para seguir trabajando por una Agenda 2030 transformadora en nuestro país, ¿no? Ese documento bueno, se ha trabajado, por supuesto, como siempre hacemos en Futuro en Común, a través de procesos participativos más o menos pausados, lo que el ritmo del proceso oficial nos ha permitido, y siempre dando cabida a todas las entidades miembro de Futuro en Común, que en definitiva es prácticamente la totalidad de las organizaciones de sociedad civil que están trabajando en Agenda 2030, ¿no? Además, hemos estado ser parte, escuchaba a Laura casi con envidia, ¿no? Porque nosotros hemos intentado ser parte del proceso de la delegación oficial y no ha podido ser, ¿no? Al final, a quienes han integrado en la delegación oficial ha sido una representación de cada uno de los órganos de la gobernanza, que ahora os explicaré por quiénes están constituidos, y entonces, como tal, desde sociedad civil ha habido una representación del órgano en el que está representada la sociedad civil, pero en representación de ese órgano institucional, bueno, de ese organismo del sistema de gobernanza y no tanto de sociedad civil. Entonces, lo que hicimos fue intentar liderar la posición del Major Group y toda la declaración y las preguntas al Gobierno de España. Y como habíamos sido líderes en ese proceso, sí teníamos, en principio íbamos a poder intervenir en el examen explicando esa posición y trasladando las preguntas al gobierno, pero por desgracia hubo un problema en la conexión. Además, los intérpretes, por lo visto, abandonaron la sesión y cuando todo se restableció, el moderador nos saltó de turno, con lo cual la sociedad civil como tal se quedó sin palabra en el examen nacional voluntario, ¿no? Bueno, la siguiente diapositiva es la portada del informe y el vínculo que hemos hecho, sin más, para que lo podáis conocer. Y ya la otra, aquí quería explicar un poquito, con un poco más de detalle, el proceso oficial. Ya os he dicho, fue un proceso muy rápido, en solo 6 meses, con un montón de fases intermedias y procesos de validación intermedios, y sobre todo apoyado en el organismo, en los órganos de gobernanza, que son 3. Hay uno multinivel, que es donde están todos los gobiernos territoriales del Estado español, que como sabéis es muy descentralizado, el órgano interministerial, donde están la mayor parte de los ministerios del Estado central, y luego el Consejo de Desarrollo Sostenible, que es donde participamos la sociedad civil junto con el mundo empresarial, el mundo académico y una representación del gobierno que es de la Secretaría de Estado de Agenda 2030, pero que es dependiente del Ministerio de Derechos Sociales y no tiene, digamos, un rol supraministerial, ¿no? Entonces, hemos trabajado en ese consejo en el que tenemos 3 vocalías. Es un consejo que ha contado con muy poco recurso de apoyo técnico y metodológico, con lo cual el proceso ha recaído en buena medida sobre las espaldas de las organizaciones que hemos estado ahí participando. Esto ha hecho que, por un lado, que tengamos más impacto en el resultado final, en el informe que ha emitido este Consejo de Desarrollo Sostenible sobre la misma estrategia de desarrollo sostenible. Buena parte de los elementos de análisis de futuro en común fueron considerados, por no decir prácticamente todos, pero claro, al final es un órgano que ha tenido poco peso en el resultado final, ¿no? Si queréis la siguiente diapositiva, por favor. Bueno, este simplemente es una imagen sobre el sistema de gobernanza que os he explicado, que bueno, además está en castellano, con lo cual muchos de vosotros creo que no lo entenderéis. Si vamos a la siguiente, por favor. Vale, entonces, la siguiente, a ver, sí. Vale, entonces el resultado final, a pesar de que hemos tenido mucho impacto en todo lo que se ha trabajado en el seno de nuestro órgano de gobernanza, el Consejo de Desarrollo Sostenible, no hemos conseguido que el Consejo de Desarrollo Sostenible tuviera un peso en el resultado final, donde han tenido más peso los distintos ministerios que participaban en el órgano interministerial. Con lo cual, la Estrategia de Desarrollo Sostenible es, a nuestro juicio, muy acertada en cuanto al diagnóstico que hace y la identificación de retos país. Ahí sí que vemos que hay un éxito clarísimo de la incidencia de futuro en común a lo largo de todos estos años, porque esos 8 retos país que identifica la Estrategia de Desarrollo Sostenible coinciden en buena medida con los grandes ejes de transformación que veníamos demandando desde Futuro en Común para conseguir arrastrar el conjunto de la Agenda 2030, pero pierde mucha ambición cuando aterriza a metas, sobre todo a metas, indicadores para medir y medidas para conseguir abordar esos desafíos puestos, esos desafíos identificados, ¿no? Por así decirlo. Con lo cual, además, como decía, el sistema integral de coherencia de políticas para desarrollo sostenible que propusimos desde Futuro en Común al Gobierno, anclado a la Agenda 2030, sí ha sido incorporado en la estrategia.
Maria, can I ask that you please start rounding up?
Sorry?
Can I ask that you please start rounding up?
Sorry, I don't understand what you said. I'm out of time?
Yes, please.
Okay,
if you can close your
just...
thoughts in 30 seconds, that would be very helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry. Bueno, simplemente decir que el proceso, o sea, que el resultado final no es suficientemente ambicioso o tal y como nosotros lo hubiéramos esperado, y además que vemos en España una pérdida de relevancia política de la Agenda 2030 y, por tanto, del documento de Estrategia de Desarrollo Sostenible en sí mismo. Y creemos que no va a conseguir ser el documento orientador de toda la acción de gobierno. Y luego ya en las próximas, ya solo a nivel de titulares, en las próximas diapositivas, compartir que también organizamos un side event en el que queríamos precisamente posicionar esta pérdida de relevancia de la Agenda 2030. Ahí tenéis el enlace del vídeo para quien lo quiera consultar. Tuvimos reuniones bilaterales con el gobierno también, donde poder trasladar estas preocupaciones y hacer estrategias conjuntas de incidencia. Y ya, bueno, por último, pues aquí las lecciones aprendidas que no me da tiempo a repasar y volver a sintetizar, pero que ya han sido comentadas a lo largo de mi presentación. Muchas gracias y disculpen por el tiempo.
Yes, thank you so much, Maria, for that experience from Spain. We really do appreciate you sharing this very useful insights with us today. I'll now take it over now to the dialogue session where we are expecting that you would have some questions that you would like to type in the chat box or the Q&A chat. Better still, if you want to talk about them, we will also ask that you raise up your hand so that I can acknowledge that Laura and Clara would be helping me here so that as much as possible I can balance the chat and also any attendees whose hands we have on. But there's a question that goes to Jude here. And Jude, the question is saying, yes, you're right. How can the UNDP or even the civil society get engaged in the SDGs monitoring process with the hostile government? That's the first question. And the B part of that question, is it possible to extend some support? Jude, do you want to shoot on that? Do I still have Jude on the call?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. Yes. The VNRs are being.
Jude, I'm not sure whether it is my connections. We can't hear you so well.
Okay. I'm trying.
Hello?
Oyebesi, maybe
yes.
his colleague Gwilyn
might
be able to come in. The sound seems to be a problem.
Yes, Gwilyn, do we still have you on the call while we're trying to get you to sort the...
Yes, I'm available on the call. Can you hear me?
Okay, yes, I can hear you, Gwilyn. Then we'll see whether Jude can jump in at some point when he's able to sort that out. Yes, please go ahead, Gwilyn.
Of course. So I think what Hlpf was saying was that he has responded to the question in the chat. But in essence, he said that the VNR process is led by the governments, and that's how it's mandated by the 2030 agenda. But of course, the UN supports good governance and civil society participation wherever it can. And by all means, sessions like this are particularly important for lesson learning between different civil society coalitions in order to address similar issues that are occurring with hostile governments, particularly lessons learned between the annual cycles of the Hlpf.
Okay, thank you so much, William. Can I have Mamo Ngalin? Sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name very well. My sincere apologies. Can I have Mamo on mute and give his or her comments in 30 seconds? Please unmute.
Oyebesi, there is another hand up from Lotfi Ben.
Yes.
Now,
yeah. So Lotfi Ben, do you want to, I see you typed this out already, but do you want to unmute yourself and let's hear your voice?
Oui, bon, je pense que après les présentations, j'ai compris que les présentations concernaient beaucoup plus les pays qui avaient à présenter un rapport en 2020 ou en 2021, donc auprès du Forum politique de haut niveau. C'est-à-dire que je m'étonnais à ce que effectivement, au Sénégal, chaque année, il y a des rapports de suivi en ce qui concerne la mise en œuvre des ODD, des rapports nationaux dont l'élaboration implique la société civile et que, parallèlement également, dans le cadre du groupe de travail de la société civile mis en place sous l'égide du CONGAT. Nous faisons aussi chaque année donc un rapport de contribution. Donc voilà, donc je m'étonnais à ce que dans les présentations, je vois d'autres pays et pas le Sénégal, du point de vue du gouvernement, ni du point de vue de la société civile, mais après j'ai compris. Merci.
Yes, thank you so much for that. Lofty, thanks for that experience from Senegal. Jonita, please unmute.
C'est Lotfi Belmawi. Hello.
Hello, I can hear you. Is that Jonita? Hello.
C'est Lotfi Belmawi.
Oh, you're busy. I think we missed Lotfi because it was previously Mamo.
Oh, Lotfi Belmawi, please go ahead, please.
Merci beaucoup. C'est Hlpf Belmawi, Centre stratégique pour la promotion du développement durable en Tunisie. J'ai deux points à soulever. Le premier point, c'est qu'il est nécessaire de renforcer les capacités de la société civile des pays en développement, en mettre en collaboration la société civile du Nord. Donc, c'est la collaboration à l'échelle internationale des associations du Nord et du Sud pour renforcer la capacité de la société civile dans les pays en développement avec plusieurs contraintes. Deuxièmement, l'action volontaire presque pour les sociétés, les pays en développement. Je pense, d'après mon expérience et d'après mon assistance à plusieurs rapports nationaux volontaires en juillet à New York et même en Tunisie, je pense la majorité, c'est des littératures. Il n'y a pas, comment dirais-je, une analyse approfondie après la présentation des rapports volontaires selon des indicateurs. Il n'y a pas un check-up de ces rapports. Donc, après, il faut inciter les gouvernements, et en plus de ça, d'introduire la société civile dans leur préparation, parce que dans les pays en développement, là, il y a un blocage parfois entre la société civile et l'administration. Et merci beaucoup.
Yes, thank you very much, Lofty. Christelle from Spong, Burkina Faso is saying, what would you advise when the UN body leading the process is dealing mainly with politicized SC organized by the government to praise their performance? Maybe she's trying to say civil society here. So she would like us to advise when the body leading the process is dealing mainly with politicized civil society organized by government to praise their performance. Any of the panelists want to speak to this?
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, well, I think there's a problem with my laptop, so I cannot enable my video, but I'll try to answer it.
Okay.
Maybe I can actually put the video on the laptop. All right, yes. And so maybe you can see me on one device and hear me on the other. And I'm sorry, I dropped out in the earlier question. I just caught that Willem answered it. But again, I need to emphasize that whether we like it or not, the VNRs are being led by the government. That is basically how it was mandated in the 2030 agenda. And perhaps that's also the very reason why we have so many countries that are signing up for it. There's only a good dozen countries left that have not yet done this. So now, as for the question that was asked, it was also in the chat box. What would you advise when the UN body leading the process is dealing mainly with politicized SC? I don't know what that means. Politicized groups?
Civil society.
Oh, civil society. Okay. We are not able to check or verify here when we organize the VNR presentations what civil society is politicized and which one is not. Perhaps our colleagues in the UN office in the respective countries are better positioned to do so and could quietly press the government to engage all sectors in civil society. We want governments to engage civil society to the full extent and leaving no one behind. We have to take the word of these countries that are presenting that this is what they are doing. If we don't have that trust, then they will not present. And that is one of the pitfalls of intergovernmental work. Of course, the UN has offices in many countries that are presenting, not all, but in many. And you can rest assured that we are doing our very best to make sure that the process leading up to the VNR report is inclusive. That's basically the best answer I can give. Thank you.
Yes, Jude, before you go, there's another
Yeah, I'm not
question.
leaving. Yes.
Yeah, it's saying, is there at least a remote possibility of having the CSO alternate report endorsed by the emojis on the official UN Hlpf platform?
Yeah, we have addressed that question many times in the past few years. I'm personally a little bit disappointed that there is still no central database for the shadow reports or the alternate reports that have been produced by CSOs. There were some in 16, 17, 18. This is not that we are not something that we are able to do. We have communicated that to the steering committee of the major groups many times. And all it takes is to put a website up and put some of these reports there. Unfortunately, we are just not able to do that.
Okay, thank you so much, Jude. Thanks for that thought. Any other participant would like to add their thoughts on this before we close this part of the session? Any other hands on the attendee list? No, I'm seeing a comment here. The comment is from Mahmoudou Koliberli, if I get that right, and it's in French. Oli, Deidre, or the interpreters, can you help me check this message from Mahmoudou? It's in French.
Yeah, maybe Laura could, or yeah, Bessie. So Laura, would you mind?
Okay. So while I'm waiting for Laura to do that, I have Dr. Steen. Laura, can you just hold a moment? Let me take Dr. Steen, then I have your translation. Dr. Steen, please, 30 seconds.
I'm Dr. Shashi Singh. I'm from India. And I just had a suggestion while all the other participants were speaking, and also it was a very good presentation, because I really, it was an eye-opener for all of us, a lot of civil society organizations. We are working on the livelihood process of the downtrodden and the marginalized, especially women. And there was a suggestion which came up, and I was seconding that the UN agencies in the country should support the capacity building programs of the civil society, those who are dealing with communities and the marginalized women, and their dialogue should be direct, so that then it could be tripartite, the UN, the civil society, and then they could include that to the government. So what the process would be a more participatory by each one. So if the UN system builds a capacity to provide the SDGs at the grassroots and bring in the country, the governments to tell them what's happening really, and include that way, we ensure that the reliable civil societies are included in the process. That was my suggestion. Right? Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much for that. And let me now have Laura's interpretation of this conversation in French.
Yes, not as good as the interpreters, but it says, in Ivory Coast, the society is involved, but its contributions are not really enough taken into account for those for two reasons. Often, civil society is not valued to propose some remarks, some relevant remarks, or civil society is considered as, sorry, I have another message now, or civil society is considered political, so it's classified as opposition to the activities of the state. I hope that was good enough.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Laura. We got a sense of what Mahmoud is trying to say. Now that, civil society is often labeled as being political. And I have a comment from Kelechukwu Okezie, who is saying, thanks for the opportunity to attend this webinar. There's need to strengthen the capacity of CSOs around VNR, and I'm sure that is why we're having this session today. It's been very much interesting to hear colleagues tell us about their experience, and also to learn from what to do and not to do during the VNR process. I'll now hand over the next session to Holly, who would be, giving us some thoughts on next steps.
Oyebisi, just before you pass to us, I'm aware that there were also some questions in the chat around how to strengthen the space for civil society engagement at the national level. I just wondered whether any of our national colleagues who presented earlier would like to say anything more on that.
Okay, brilliant. Anyone wants to take up that?
Sure.
Maria.
Can I? Okay.
Yes, please.
Okay. So in the context of open space in Indonesia, we actively engage with the government by actively inviting them in webinar discussion and the meeting. And for information as well, in Indonesia, we have national coordinator team for sustainable development goals, which one of them are representative of civil society organizations. So we recognize that the government has recognized the importance of civil society in the process, but still we need to improve the quality performance of the national coordinator, which consists of multi-stakeholder people. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your thoughts. Any other panelists wants to share their thoughts on this before we wrap up this side of the event and then move to the last part for today, which will be the next steps? Any other thoughts from our panelists?
Can I come in really quick?
Yes, please.
Yeah. I don't want to disappoint people by just putting a website up there, but I will put a few links there that may help on the basis of previous experiences on how civil society can reach out to governments in preparation for the VNRs. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We'll be waiting to see or have those links shared, and we can jump on the sites to read about them.
Yo podría hacer un comentario. Soy Laura. Laura Becerra. ¿Sí?
Okay, please do that for 30 seconds, please. Yes, please, for 30 seconds, please.
Gracias. Me cuenta más a mí el tiempo que a otros participantes. Ya lo medí. Quiero decir dos cosas, que si bien tenemos una buena práctica que hemos expuesto el día de hoy en México respecto a nuestro informe alternativo, no significa que tenemos una aceptación y un entorno favorable para la participación de sociedad civil. El gobierno mexicano, y es un desafío, el gobierno de México no incorpora a otros actores no gubernamentales a su quehacer político. Es muy difícil, tenemos el gran reto de que lo que recomendamos y dijimos respecto a la agenda realmente se asuma y consigamos el diálogo. Estamos en eso, de manera que una vez que se hace un informe alternativo hay que tener una estrategia de seguimiento de las organizaciones participantes para presionar a nuestros gobiernos a que dialoguen con nosotros respecto a la experiencia que nosotros tenemos muchas veces de más años que el propio gobierno en estos asuntos del desarrollo. Gracias.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for also sharing those thoughts with us. We'll now move to the next session on the agenda, and that will be the closing remarks and next steps. And to start us off on that would be Ollie Enman of the Action for Sustainable Development. Ollie, you have our attention for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Oyebisi, and thank you for guiding us through this discussion so ably today. I think it's been a very, very rich discussion, and certainly from our side, Action for Sustainable Development, we're extremely pleased to be co-hosting this session. I wanted to just cover three points. First of all, I want to recognize what a lot of people have highlighted in the chat, and I've been responding as we go along, that there are serious challenges remaining. We know that the context in many countries is very difficult, and certainly the COVID pandemic has made it even harder in many cases for us to find ways to engage on the Sustainable Development Goals. But I'm always optimistic. We are now in the decade of action, and we do need to find ways to work together across civil society. And I think one of the crucial points for us is how we build those strong coalitions and how we, across all different parts of civil society, can really strengthen each other's capabilities and enable those voices to be heard. I think we've also heard a little bit around the importance of comparability between the VNRs. And I think still we're not seeing that from governments. We know that some governments still don't actually report on all the SDGs. And so we as civil society have a duty and a right to step up and fill some of those gaps. So there are 2 or 3 ways that we can work together to do that. First of all, from the point of view of Action for Sustainable Development, some of you will know we do have some resource every year to support a number of countries that will be taking a VNR process forward, and we'll be opening up that discussion with all of you to hear from those of you who are active in some of the countries that are doing a VNR in the coming year. That resource comes from the Swiss government, which we're very grateful for. And we do have toolkits. We also have a scorecard, which Nicolas has outlined earlier today. And we'll be looking at how we can help to use that methodology and use the resource that we have in approximately 20 to 30 countries, at least in the coming year. Secondly, for those of you who may not be familiar, there is an official process, which is the major groups and other stakeholders. And I'm relatively new as one of the organizing partners for the NGO major group. And as I've also been mentioning in the chat, there will be an official process for any stakeholder under the 21 different stakeholder groups that are now defined. So whether you're from an NGO, from a women's organization, a youth organization, disability organization, trade union, academia, there's a very, very broad range of different organizations. All of those will be invited to submit an expression of interest. Anyone who's a member of any of those stakeholder groups at the national level in any of the countries that is currently under review for 2022 will be invited to come forward, fill in a short survey, a short expression of interest, and through that survey, we will start the process much, much earlier, very early in the new year, in January. Well, the survey will go out next week. It will go out in December, and the process will start in January, where you'll be able to actually find out who else is working in your country, how you might collaborate, how you might strengthen those coalitions. And then through that dialogue, and as you've heard from UNDESA today, at least one person from each of those discussions at the national level will have the opportunity to actually speak at the official sessions at the Hlpf. And that is a process that will be ongoing from January right the way through to July. So there will be opportunities there, and we'll certainly communicate those opportunities very strongly with all of you and our wider networks. And finally, I think I did want to also just highlight that we know that budgets are limited, and we know that the process is challenging. But I do want to say, as you've heard already, that the UN country teams can often be an ally. So I think if we are finding it challenging in certain key countries, please raise that with us. We can raise that with UNDESA. You've heard that from Hlpf and Willem today, and we'll make sure that where there are challenges, that where possible, the UN can also act as an ally to help to open those doors. We raised this also with the president of the Economic and Social Council recently, the ECOSOC at the UN, and he also highlighted that he wanted to see this process as inclusive as possible. And so that's coming from the ambassadors in New York as well. So wherever there is a challenge, please do raise it with us, and we'll do everything we can to open up those channels of communication. So thank you again to everyone who's joined us today, and looking forward to continuing this dialogue over the coming months.
Thank you so much, Oli. And I'll now give the floor to Deidre de Boker of Forus to share the closing remarks and our next steps. Over to you, Deidre.
Thank you, Bessie, and thank you. I'd like just echo what Ollie has said. Thank you for your excellent moderation today. We had a lot of speakers. I think you helped us to get through the agenda very smoothly. So I'm going to just finish up today. We're talking about next steps by looking a little beyond the end of this year into 2022. And we're delighted to have hosted today's webinar with Action for Sustainable Development. We believe that the earlier that civil society starts to prepare for the high-level political forum next year in July, when the governments will be presenting their VNRs to their international peers, to other governments at the high-level political forum, we believe the earlier that civil society can engage with this process, the better. So we're doing this now on the 1st of December, which is excellent. I think it's earlier than we've done it before, but we do intend to continue after Christmas. So A4SD and Forus will be collaborating further on further capacity development webinars in the early part of next year, leading up to the high-level political forum. And I suppose for that reason, I'm going to just say a little bit about the fact that even though the VNR process is largely a national process, and we've heard great stories today from Spain, from Mexico, from Madagascar, from Indonesia, about the struggles of civil society and the efforts that civil society makes to really engage with the VNR process and to influence the VNR process at the national level. But once the national process, once the VNR report is largely, prepared, I suppose then the process moves to the regional level. And so when we're thinking about the VNR process, we have to think of it as a multi-level process. It's largely national, but there are extremely important opportunities at the regional level and also at the international level, at the high-level political forum, to influence the long-term outcomes of the VNRs. So just to say that next year, the regional sustainable development forums will be starting usually in March, and they run through usually until May. So over the space of a couple of months, every region will host a regional sustainable development forum. These are hosted by the UN economic commissions, and those are commissions that have been working for a long time in these regions, and they are now embracing the SDGs and hosting this sustainable development forum in each region in those months between March and May. So the regional forums are a really valuable opportunity for civil society to engage with the debates that are going on at the regional level, to network with other peers, with both other civil society organizations at the regional level, learn from them. What are civil society organizations in other countries doing in terms of good practice? And then how can that be used to pressurize their own governments to try and do better with the VNR process? So a lot can be achieved through the networking that happens at the regional level, but also meeting other stakeholders. We know that multi-stakeholder partnerships are really being encouraged by the SDGs, and we can very often see at the regional level meet actors like academics, private sector actors, other civil society organizations, and other actors who are very interested in the SDGs. So very important, the networking opportunities, but also advocacy opportunities. So there's an opportunity to influence our own governments at the regional level when their peers at the regional level are listening carefully and looking at what they're doing, but also to influence other governments. So, it is an ideal opportunity to try to put forward our key advocacy messages, and to do that often through side events that can be hosted with CSOs from other countries, from other parts of the region. So a lot can be achieved at the regional level, and there is a summary report, a regional summary report, that comes out of these regional sustainable development forums and goes to the high-level political forum. Now, up to now, the high-level political forum doesn't appear to give a huge amount of attention or importance to the regional reports, but more and more those reports will be having a big impact on the international level, because it's recognized that there's such a big gap between the national level and the international level, that the regional level, so regional, priorities, regional needs are something that the high-level political forum really needs to look at more carefully. So when we think in terms of environmental issues, they often go way beyond national borders and have to be looked at sometimes regionally. When we think of infrastructural projects, Some of them are, you know, appropriate at the national level, but sometimes it makes more sense to think of them at the regional level. So for lots of reasons, it does make sense for civil society to keep an eye on the regional summary reports that are coming out of the regional sustainable development forums, and will go to the high level political forum where they'll be discussed. And undoubtedly in the future, funding decisions will be made linked to those reports. So just to, again, want to say in conclusion that it is very important for all of us to also take the regional sustainable development forums into consideration next year, and to really engage with them. And the Forus survey that Laura presented earlier seems to highlight that certainly a lot of Forus members don't engage at the regional level. So I'd really like to encourage you to find out who is the contact person in the Regional Economic Commission. So it's UNECA for Africa, it's UNESCAP for Asia and the Pacific, it's UNECLAC for Latin America, South America or Latin America, and it is UNECE for Europe, North America, Canada, and Israel. That's a very large region, and UNESCWA for the Middle East. So really encourage all of you to engage, and we will, as I said, hold other capacity building seminars or webinars early next year to help you to do that. And we look forward to engaging further with you. Really hope that today's webinar was useful for you. Thank you to everybody who presented. I think it's made for a really rich and interesting webinar, and one that we can reflect on. And we'll certainly be sending you out all the PowerPoint presentations that were made today. We'd like to thank Hlpf and his colleague Gwilyn also for participating on behalf of Undesa today in the webinar. So back to you to say the very final words, Oyebesi, but thank you very much again for participating today to all of you. Over to you, Oyebesi.
Thank you so much, Deidre. And there's a public service announcement. There will be an open call to any and all major groups and other stakeholders to share their expression of interest in the VNR reporting via an online survey. This will be launched next week, and we will share with all registered participants. That message is coming from Oli Henman. And on this note, let me thank A4SD and Forus for the opportunity to be able to moderate this session. Thanks to all the panelists and thanks to all the attendees. I wish you a very good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Bye-bye.
And Oyebesi, apologies, would you mind just, you see there's a 30-second webinar that our colleagues have asked us just to remind people about. It's at the end of the webinar. So before you leave, the link is in the chat, and apologies, Oyebesi, but if people could just do, it's a short satisfaction survey linked to today's webinar. If you could fill it out before you leave, we would be very grateful.
Okay, please, can you just complete that in 30 seconds? And we'll use that to gauge how satisfied you are with today's webinar. The link is in the chat box, and it's 30 seconds. It's just 30 seconds to do that. And while you're at that, let me wish you a very good evening and to say thank you again for joining this very important webinar. Do we need to put on our videos so that we can just take a screenshot or screen grab of participants? Do we need to do that, Deidre?
That's a great idea, Oyebesi. I think we could. Our comms colleagues are on the call, so we can take, if everybody would switch on, as long as everything doesn't crash.
I mean, wherever you are, you can put on your video, no pressures. Just put it on and let's have some screen grab for newsletters, for social media pages.
Maria, ¿dónde estás?
Yeah, that we had this event today, very useful.
Ahora sí.
You can put on your video.
Oli.
Yeah.